I camped alone in a state forest I had been to dozens of times. It was close enough to home that I didn't need a map anymore. I knew where the trail dipped, where the ground stayed wet after rain, where the trees opened into that small clearing I liked. I had slept there in every season except winter. Nothing had ever happened there. That was the point. I arrived in the late afternoon, when the light was still warm and low. The clearing looked the same as always. Pine needles packed flat, old fire ring made of blackened stones. A few fallen branches stacked off to the side from past trips. No trash, no tracks that stood out. I took my pack off and stood there for a minute, listening. Whined through the trees, distant birds, no engines, no voices, just forest noise, the kind you stop noticing after a while. I set my tent in the same spot I always used, a few yards from the fire ring, where the ground was level and the roots stayed deep. Muscle memory took over. Lay the tent flat, line up the corners, pull the stakes from the side pocket of my pack. I always counted them. I had done it since I was young. 8 stakes. I counted them in my hand, then again as I drove them in. Front left, front right, back corners, guy lines, 8 total. When I finished, I pressed each one with my boot to make sure it was solid. They were in deep, straight, normal. I cooked a simple meal as the light faded. Nothing fancy. I didn't light a big fire, just used my stove and sat on a log while I ate. The woods went quiet the way they always did at dusk. Birds stopped. Bugs picked up. I cleaned up, sealed my food, and hung it farther out than usual because a ranger had warned about raccoons the last time I was there. After that, I walked the edge of the clearing with my headlamp, more out of habit than concern. I didn't see anything out of place. I went to bed early. The ground was cool. The tent fabric smelled like dust and old smoke. I remember thinking how familiar everything felt, like putting on an old jacket. I slept through the night without waking up once. No strange sounds, no footsteps, no snapped branches, just wind and the soft movement of the trees. Morning came gray and quiet. I unzipped the tent and sat there for a minute, stretching my back and legs. Dew had settled on everything. The clearing looked flat and clean. When I stood up, I noticed something behind the tent, near the back edge where the fabric met the ground. There was a stake in the soil. At first, it didn't register as wrong. It looked exactly like mine. Same dull metal, same scuffed head, same bend near the top from when I'd hit a rock months back. It was driven straight down, deep enough that only the head showed, just like the others. It sat about a foot behind the tent wall, not attached to anything. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I had put it there. I counted again, walking around the tent and touching each one with my boot. Front left, front right, sides, corners, guy lines. 8. Then this one made 9. I felt a small flicker of embarrassment. I assumed I'd miscounted the night before. It made sense. I was tired. Light was fading. Maybe I'd pulled out a spare without thinking. I crouched down and grabbed it. It was solid in the ground, took real effort to pull free. When it came loose, the hole it left was clean and tight, like it had been pounded in with care. I looked at the stake in my hand. It was mine, no doubt about it. Same brand, same wear marks. I shrugged it off, told myself I'd figure it out later, and packed up. I didn't linger. Something about that extra stake bothered me more than it should have. But I didn't let myself sit with it. I rolled my tent, stowed my gear, scattered the cold fire ring the way I always did, and shouldered my pack. Before leaving, I did one last sweep of the clearing. Nothing else looked off. No footprints I could clearly identify. No broken branches. No trash. Just the same place I'd slept in so many times before. The hike out followed the same narrow trail I had come in on. It wound through dense trees, then along a shallow ridge where you could sometimes hear cars far away if the wind was right. That morning, it was still. My boots made a steady rhythm against the dirt. I walked for about 2 miles before stopping to adjust my pack straps. I leaned against a tree and took a drink of water. When I went to tighten the side straps, my hand brushed the pocket where I kept my tent stakes. Out of habit, I opened it and counted them again. 8. I counted them slowly, laying them across my palm one by one. 8 stakes. No extras. No spares tucked somewhere else. I checked the rest of my pack anyway. Every pocket. Every pouch. Nothing. I had owned this tent for years. Came with 8 stakes. I had never bought replacements. I had never carried extras. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the stakes like they might change. The memory of that 9th stake in the ground came back sharp and clear. Where it was placed. How deep it was. How it matched mine perfectly. Someone had put it there. That thought settled heavy in my chest. Not a vague idea. Plain fact. Someone had been in my campsite while I slept. Close enough to my tent to place that stake. Careful enough not to make noise. Careful enough to use my exact gear or gear identical to it. I finished adjusting my pack and kept walking, but my pace changed. I listened harder. I checked over my shoulder more often. Every snapped twig made my back tighten. The forest felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because my trust in it had. About half a mile later, I noticed something else. A shallow depression beside the trail, where the leaves were pressed down in a way that didn't match animal movement. Nearby, a broken fern bent at knee height. Then another spot where the dirt was scuffed, not from boots walking along the trail, but from someone standing still. I didn't stop to study them too long. I kept moving. The trailhead parking lot came into view after another mile. My car sat alone just like I'd left it. I dropped my pack into the trunk and stood there breathing for a moment before getting in. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the delayed realization of how exposed I had been. At home, while cleaning my gear, I noticed something I hadn't before. One of my stakes had fresh marks near the tip. Bright metal where dirt had been scraped away recently. It hadn't been there the last time I'd camped. It matched the depth of the hole I'd pulled that extra stake from. I reported it to the park office later that week. Not as an emergency, just as information. A ranger followed up and told me they had found an illegal game camera hidden near that clearing months earlier. Someone had been monitoring foot traffic. Someone who knew when people camped alone. I never went back to that clearing. I still camp, but I don't go alone anymore, and I don't return to the same place twice in a row. I count my stakes every time. 8. Always 8. And if I ever see a 9th again, I won't assume I made a mistake. I camped during a solo fishing trip in British Columbia because I wanted water that hadn't been pressured and space where I didn't have to see anyone else. It was late summer, edging toward fall. Cool nights, shorter days, the kind of season where bears were still active, feeding hard before winter. I knew that going in. I planned for it, or at least I thought I did. The drive in took most of a day. Logging roads that twisted through dense forest, washed out in places, marked by old tape and fading kilometer signs. The radio lost signal early. By the time I parked, the quiet felt thick, like it pressed against my ears. I loaded my pack, locked the truck, and started hiking along the river. The water was exactly what I hoped for. Cold, clear, fast in some stretches, glassy and deep in others. I fished until my arms ached, moving upstream, then back down again, marking spots I wanted to return to in the morning. By late afternoon, the light softened and the shadows stretched long across the riverbank. I picked my camp on a small rise above the water, open enough that I could see around me. No thick brush right up against the tent. I checked for tracks. Old bear scat near the trail, dried and crumbly. Nothing fresh in the immediate area. Still, I stayed alert. Every snap of a twig made my head turn. I set up my tent carefully, staked it tight, checked the seams, hung my food and anything with a smell well away from camp, high and out of reach. I wiped my hands clean. I took my time. Rushing makes mistakes, and mistakes get noticed out there. Before climbing into the tent, I lined my boots neatly under the vestibule. Side by side, toes pointing out, laces tucked in. I'd done that my whole life. Habit drilled into me from years of camping. It meant I could slide them on fast if I needed to get up in the dark. It also meant I always knew exactly where they were. The night came down quiet. No wind. The trees stood still. The river murmured steadily, masking smaller sounds. I lay on my back inside the tent, listening, letting my breathing slow. Every now and then, something moved in the distance. A branch snapping, a stone shifting, normal forest noise. Nothing close. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. No sudden sound, no dream, just that sense of being alert, like my body had decided something was wrong before my mind caught up. Then I heard it, fabric brushing lightly against the side of my tent. Not scraping, not tearing, just a soft, careful sound, like something testing how much pressure it could apply without making noise. The nylon moved inward a fraction, then eased back. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath without thinking about it. My chest froze mid-rise. My ears strained. The river kept flowing. Everything else felt suspended. The sound came again, closer to the vestibule. A gentle drag, as if something passed alongside the tent wall, barely touching it. No heavy steps, no sudden weight. Whatever it was knew how to move quietly. I thought about bears, their size, their clumsiness, the way they tend to blunder and huff and push. This wasn't that. This was controlled, measured, like whoever or whatever it was understood exactly how loud it could be without waking someone fully. My heart pounded hard enough that I worried it would give me away. I lay perfectly still, hands curled inside my sleeping bag, mind racing through options. Spray was within reach, but using it inside a tent would be a disaster. Getting up would make noise. Zipping the door would be loud. I stayed where I was. The fabric brushed again, this time right where my boots were stored. The vestibule shifted slightly. The zipper tugged just enough to make the faintest sound. Then nothing. Time stretched. Minutes passed. Or maybe seconds. Couldn't tell. I counted breaths in my head to stay focused. 1, 2, 3. My throat felt dry. My muscles started to ache from the tension. Eventually, the sounds stopped. No retreating footsteps. No crash through the brush. Just the river and the quiet forest again. I stayed awake until my eyes burned, listening for any sign of return. None came. When morning light finally filtered through the tent walls, I felt a rush of relief that left me weak. Birds started calling. The forest came back to life in a way that felt safe and familiar. I sat up slowly, careful not to rush. I unzipped the tent and reached for my boots. They weren't there. For a moment, my brain refused to accept it. I stared at the empty space under the vestibule, convinced I was missing something obvious. I pushed the tent fabric aside. Nothing. I checked inside the tent, then under my pack, then around the edges like they might have slid somehow. My boots were gone. I stepped out barefoot onto the cold ground, scanning the area. No sign of a struggle. No torn fabric. No obvious tracks right by the tent. Just my footprints from the night before and the smooth dirt around them. I followed a faint disturbance in the ground away from camp. 20 yards out, near the edge of the trees, I saw them. My boots stood upright, side by side, clean, toes pointed directly back at my tent. They hadn't been dragged. No scuff marks. No random placement. They were positioned carefully, like someone had taken the time to set them just right. The laces were still tucked in. No bite marks. No tearing. No sign an animal had been chewing or playing. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. The forest felt different now. Closer, like it was leaning in. I walked back to camp, pulled the boots on with shaking hands, and packed up fast. I didn't fish anymore. I didn't eat breakfast. I broke down the tent and checked every inch of it. No damage. No claw marks. Nothing. The hike out felt heavier than the hike in. Every shadow looked like it might move. Every sound made my shoulders tighten. I never saw anyone. I never heard anyone following me. But the feeling didn't leave. Back at the truck, I sat for a long time before turning the key. I replayed the night over and over. The careful movement, the missing boots, the way they were placed so I would find them. Animals steal things. They drag them off. They chew. They scatter. They don't set them upright and point them back where they came from. Something came into my camp that night. Something that knew what boots were for. Something that understood how to send a message without leaving a mark. I still fish, I still camp, but I don't go that deep alone anymore, and I never leave my boots outside the tent. I hiked 6 hours into the national forest in October because I wanted distance. Not peace, distance. There's a difference. Peace feels soft. Distance feels sharp and clean, like cold air in your lungs. The trailhead was empty when I parked. No other cars. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. At the ranger station earlier that morning, the permit board was blank for the week. I checked twice. Nobody had signed in for backcountry camps in that section. It was late in the season. Cold nights. Short days. Most people didn't bother anymore. I liked that. The hike in was slow. Fallen leaves hid the trail in places, slick and dark from old rain. The forest smelled like wet bark and iron-rich soil. Every few miles, the wind pushed through the trees and knocked loose dead branches. They hit the ground with a hollow crack that echoed longer than it should have. I kept stopping, listening, then moving again. By the time I reached the spot I had marked on my map, the light was already fading. The sun dropped fast behind the ridge, draining color from everything. I picked a small clearing just off the trail, far enough in that I couldn't hear the road, close enough that I could find my way back in the morning without trouble. I set up my tent on packed dirt, brushed away pine needles, staked it tight. I checked the ground for tracks without really thinking about it. Old deer prints, nothing fresh. The temperature dropped fast once the sun was gone. My breath showed as a pale cloud. I ate cold food to save time and didn't light a fire. The forest felt too still for that. Sound traveled too well. By full dark, the woods settled into that deep silence that only happens far from towns. No distant traffic, no planes, just the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft creak of trees shifting in the cold. I crawled into my sleeping bag and lay on my back, watching the faint outline of branches against the sky through the mesh. That was when I noticed the glow. At first I thought it was the moon coming up behind the trees, but it was too low, too steady. It came from the ground, maybe 100 yards away, deeper into the forest. Orange, controlled, not flickering wild like a brush fire, not bright like a flare. It stayed tight, contained, like someone who knew exactly how much wood to feed it. I froze, listening. No voices, no laughter, no clatter of gear, just the firelight pulsing slow and calm through the trunks. I stayed still. My body felt heavy, like the cold had soaked into my bones all at once. I watched the glow through a gap in the trees. It didn't move. It didn't grow. It just stayed there, patient. Minutes passed, then an hour. I checked my watch without turning on my headlamp, using the dim backlight under my jacket. The fire was still there. Same size, same place. Whoever built it knew how to make it burn low and long. That took skill. That took experience. I thought about the empty permit board, about the lack of cars, about how far I had walked. I didn't think about ghosts or anything like that. I thought about people who didn't care about permits, people who didn't want to be found. I stayed inside my tent. I didn't cough. I didn't shift around. I controlled my breathing until my chest ached. Every now and then, something moved out there. Not footsteps, just the sound of weight settling, like someone adjusting how they were sitting. The fire never flared, never popped. At some point, exhaustion took over. I slept in short pieces, waking every time the wind changed or a branch snapped. Each time I woke, the glow was still there, steady, watching. Sometime before dawn, the light finally died. Not suddenly. It faded, slow and careful, until there was nothing but dark again. I waited longer. My body was stiff and sore. The cold had crept in around my neck and hands. When the sky started to turn gray, I unzipped the tent just enough to look out. The forest looked normal in daylight. Empty, calm. Frost coated the ground in a thin white layer, sparkling where the light touched it. My breath fogged the air. I stepped out and stood there for a long minute, listening. No movement, no smoke, no smell of fresh firewood. I followed the direction of the glow, moving slow, watching the ground. The frost was perfect. Smooth, undisturbed, no boot prints, no scuffs, no broken crust, just clean, untouched earth. The fire site was exactly where I expected it to be. Perfect ring of stones, blackened but neat. Ash still warm when I held my hand over it. A single log placed on one side of the ring, positioned like a seat. Not dragged there randomly, set down with care. The log faced directly toward where my tent stood. I walked the area in widening circles. Still no tracks, no trail leading in or out, no trash, no cigarette butts, no food scraps, nothing dropped by accident. Whoever had been there left nothing behind except what they wanted to leave. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make it make sense. The fire had burned all night without being fed. That meant someone stayed there, sitting, watching, in freezing temperatures, without moving enough to leave marks in the frost. I went back to my camp and broke it down fast. My hands shook, partly from the cold, partly from something else I didn't want to name. I packed without care, stuffing gear wherever it fit. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing between the trees. I didn't. The hike out felt longer than the hike in. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow looked wrong. When I reached the trailhead and saw my car, I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. Weeks later, I checked the Forest Service website. No reports, no incidents, no mention of anyone else out there that night. I never went back to that section of the forest. What stays with me isn't fear of the dark or the woods. It's the precision, the care, the fact that someone went that far in, stayed that still, and left without a trace. They didn't approach my tent. They didn't try to scare me off. They just wanted a clear view. I slept in a bivy sack near a river in western Montana because I didn't want to deal with a tent. Late September, shoulder season, fewer people. I had been hiking for days and planned to cover ground fast, sleep light, move early. A bivy made sense. Roll it out, crawl in, disappear. The river ran wide and slow where I stopped that night. Cold water, clear enough to see rounded stones on the bottom near the bank. The sound was steady and even like white noise turned low. No wind at all. The air felt heavy in that quiet way it gets before frost. The sky was clear, full of stars sharp enough to look fake. I picked a flat spot on a gravel bar above the waterline. No brush, no tall grass, good visibility in every direction. I checked for tracks without thinking about it too much. Some old elk sign closer to the treeline. Nothing fresh near my spot. I laid my pad down, then the bivy, oriented so my head was slightly uphill. Habit. I like knowing which way I can sit up fast. I ate quick, wiped my hands clean, packed everything away. No fire. I didn't want smoke on my clothes. The river already masked enough sound. I slid into the bivy, zipped it up to my chin, and lay there watching the stars through the mesh panel. The nylon felt cool against my face. My breathing slowed. The river kept moving. I fell asleep easier than I expected. Sometime later, I woke up without knowing why. No sound had changed. The river was the same. The night was still windless. The stars were still there, though shifted slightly. What woke me was a feeling. The air near my face felt warm. Not the normal trapped heat of a bivy. This was different. Damp, heavy, like air that had already been breathed. I didn't move. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't even swallow. My body went tight all at once, like every muscle had been pulled inward. My heart started pounding hard enough that I worried it might be heard. Then I noticed the breathing. Slow, controlled, not rushed, not panicked, inches from my head. It wasn't loud, just the soft sound of air moving in and out. Wet, steady, the kind of breathing someone does when they are calm and paying attention. I kept my eyes shut. I focused on not reacting. I told myself over and over that if it was an animal, sudden movement would make it worse. I told myself it could be a deer, curious, sniffing. I told myself it could be anything that made sense. But animals don't breathe like that. The warmth stayed. The damp air brushed my cheek through the thin fabric. I could feel the faintest pressure change with each breath. like someone leaning just close enough to test how near they could get. Time stretched out. My legs started to ache from being held still. My jaw hurt from clenching. I could smell the river, wet stone, and something else underneath it. A faint human smell. Skin, fabric, old sweat. The breathing never touched the bivvy, never pressed against it, just hovered there, close enough that I knew exactly where the face would be if I opened my eyes. Right by my ear, right at the edge of the hood. I waited for something to happen. A grab, a sound, movement away. None of it came. The breathing stayed slow and patient, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. At some point, my fear dulled into something colder and more focused. I listened for foot placement, for shifting weight. I could hear none of it, just breathing and the river. I wondered how long they had been there before I woke up, how long they had been watching me sleep. Eventually, the warmth faded. The breathing pulled back, inch by inch, until it blended into the night air. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear splashing. Nothing broke the rhythm of the river. I stayed frozen long after it was gone. My body felt hollow. I didn't trust myself to move. When my legs cramped, I let the pain sit there. I stared into the darkness behind my closed eyelids and waited for daylight. The sky lightened slowly, gray first, then pale blue. Birds started up in the trees along the bank. Normal sounds, safe sounds. When the sun finally crested the ridge and hit my bivvy, I sat up fast and scanned everything. There was nothing there. No one standing nearby. No shape moving away. The gravel bar was empty. The river rolled on like it always had. I turned in a full circle, heart still hammering, and saw no movement. Then I looked down. The hood of my bivvy was unzipped halfway. I knew how I zipped it, all the way up every time. I liked the enclosure. I liked knowing nothing could crawl in. The zipper pull now rested several inches below where my chin had been. On the outside, I climbed out and inspected it closely. The zipper teeth were clean. No damage. No snagging. It had been opened smoothly, on purpose. I checked the ground around my head. The gravel was disturbed there, slightly, enough to show where someone had knelt or leaned in. Still no clear footprints, but the stones were shifted in a way that didn't match wind or water. I packed up immediately, hands shaking, movements sharp and careless. I didn't eat. I didn't linger. I kept looking up at the tree-line, at the bends in the river, at the open ground behind me. The hike out felt wrong. Every sound made my shoulders tense. Every place where the trail narrowed felt like a trap. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone. But I never felt alone again until I reached my truck. Later, I checked the area on a map. No nearby roads. No camps listed within miles. I reported nothing because I had nothing solid to report. No attack. No theft. Just a feeling and an unzipped zipper. I don't sleep in bivvy sacks anymore. Not near rivers. Not in open ground. I use tents now. I use locks. I put distance between myself and the dark. Because something came close enough that night to breathe on my face, chose not to do anything else, and left me alive on purpose. I was camping above Treeline in Colorado because I wanted the kind of quiet you only get when there's nowhere left for trees to hide sound. Late summer, clear weather window, high enough that the air stayed thin and dry even after sunset. I had checked the maps carefully. No established camps nearby. No trails crossing the basin except the one I came in on. Miles of open alpine ground in every direction. The hike up was slow but steady. Switchbacks carved into loose rock. Long stretches where the trail vanished into tundra and reappeared farther ahead like a suggestion more than a rule. By the time I reached my spot, my legs burned and my head felt light from the altitude. I liked that feeling. It made everything else fade. I set my camp on a flat shelf of dirt and stone just below a ridgeline. From there, I could see down into a wide valley on one side and up toward bare peaks on the other. No trees. No cover, just rock, scrub, and open sky. The wind was light but constant, enough to keep bugs away. The kind of place where you feel exposed but honest, like there's nothing between you and whatever might come. I didn't see anyone all afternoon. No movement on the ridges. No figures against the skyline. No distant voices carried by the wind. I glassed the area out of habit. Empty. As the sun dropped, the temperature followed fast. The warmth drained out of the ground, leaving the cold sharp and clean. Shadows stretched long across the basin. I cooked quickly, ate without lingering, and packed everything away. No fire, nothing to draw attention. Above Treeline, light carries forever. When the sun finally dipped behind the peaks, the world shifted. Colors flattened. The sky turned deep blue, then black. Stars came out fast and bright, more than I ever see at lower elevations. The wind died almost completely, leaving the air still and tense. That was when I heard the whistle. It came from the ridge above me. Sharp, short, a single clean note, cut off quick. I froze, listening. At first, I wasn't alarmed. Whistles carry well in open terrain. It could have been another hiker signaling their position. Maybe someone moving along the ridge who hadn't seen my camp. Sound travels strange up there. Distance lies. I waited a few seconds, then whistled back. Same pattern. Short and sharp. A simple response, the kind you use to say, "I hear you." The reply came instantly. Same whistle. Same length. Same pitch. Too perfect. There was no delay. No difference. It didn't sound like someone answering from a distance. It sounded like an echo that shouldn't exist, because the terrain didn't support one. The ridge was broken and uneven. Sound shouldn't bounce back that clean. Before I could process that, another whistle came. Same note, same timing, from a different direction. My chest tightened. I stood up slowly, scanning the ridgelines and slopes around me. The moon hadn't risen yet. The landscape was dark but not black, outlined in starlight. I couldn't see anyone. No silhouettes. No movement. Then another whistle. Same again. This one came from behind me. I didn't whistle back. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to place the sounds. They weren't random. They weren't overlapping. They were spaced just enough to feel deliberate. Like someone testing how I would react. Like a call-and-response pattern meant to map my position. I thought about animals. Marmots. Pikas. Birds. None of them whistle like that. Not that clean. Not that controlled. And not from multiple directions in sequence. I thought about hikers messing around. That made less sense the more I considered it. Nobody else had been out there all day. No headlamps. No tents. No signs of life. And if there were people, they were spread out in a way that felt intentional. Another whistle cut through the night. Closer this time. I didn't wait any longer. I broke camp fast, hands moving on instinct. Stuffed my sleeping bag. Collapsed the tent without caring how it folded. I shouldered my pack and clipped my headlamp on. The beam carved a narrow tunnel of light through the dark, making everything outside it feel closer. As I started down the trail, the whistles came again. One from above, one from the side. Same sound, same pitch, no variation. They followed as I descended, not constantly, but enough to let me know I was being tracked. Every time I slowed, another whistle sounded, like a nudge, like pressure. The trail was rough in the dark. Loose rock shifted under my boots. My breath came hard and fast from the altitude and the effort. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I focused on the ground ahead, on keeping my footing, on not falling. The whistle stayed just out of sync with my movement. Not chasing, not retreating, keeping pace. I tried to rationalize it as I went. Maybe sound bouncing strangely in the basin. Maybe wind moving across rock edges in a way that mimicked a whistle. But the precision killed those ideas. Wind doesn't repeat itself like that. Terrain doesn't respond instantly. As I dropped lower, the air thickened slightly. The cold eased a fraction. The outline of trees appeared below, dark shapes against the stars. The tree line felt like a boundary, something solid and known. The whistles came again, closer together now. One from the left, one from the right. They didn't overlap. They waited for each other, like turns being taken. My legs burned. Sweat soaked my back despite the cold. My headlamp beam shook with every step. I didn't slow until the first trees surrounded me. The moment I crossed into the trees, the whistle stopped. Not faded, not drifted away. Stopped. The forest closed in around me, branches catching the light, ground soft with needles. Sound changed immediately. The open echo vanished. Everything felt contained again. Normal. I walked another mile before I finally stopped. I leaned against a tree, bent over, trying to catch my breath. My ears rang in the sudden quiet. I listened hard. Nothing. No whistles. No movement. No footsteps following. I camped lower that night, in the trees without unpacking fully. I slept in my clothes with my boots on. Every small sound snapped me awake. But nothing else happened. At daylight, the mountains looked harmless again. Blue sky, clean air, wide open space. From below, the ridges where I'd been camping looked empty and calm. I finished the hike out without seeing anyone. Later, I checked the area. No reports. No known wildlife behavior that matched what I heard. No explanations that fit cleanly. I didn't tell anyone at first because it sounded wrong even to me. But I know what I heard. I know how precise it was. And I know the whistles stopped exactly where the trees began, like something understood boundaries better than I did. I still hike in Colorado. I still go high. But I don't camp above Treeline anymore. And I never whistle in the mountains, no matter how empty they seem. I backpacked into that valley because it looked empty on the map. No trail name, no camps marked, no permit box at the trailhead. Just a faint line where people used to walk and then stopped. That was what I wanted. Wyoming has plenty of land that looks wild but still feels managed. This place didn't. The valley sat low between two long ridges, open grass in the middle, timber climbing the sides, and a creek cutting through it like a scar. The hike in took most of a day. The trail faded into game paths and then into nothing. I followed the creek because it was the only thing that made sense. I crossed it twice where the water widened and slowed, boots off, feet numb, moving slow so I wouldn't slip. The air smelled like wet stone and sage. No wind, no planes, no distant engines, just water and my own breathing. When I reached the center of the valley, I stopped because it felt right. Flat ground, dry. A stand of pines to the west for cover. The creek about 100 yards away. I walked the area first, slow, scanning for old fire scars, trash, anything that would tell me someone else had used it. I didn't see much. One rusted can half-buried near the treeline, old enough that it could have been there for decades. No footprints, no fresh cuts, no smell of smoke. I set my camp carefully because that's how I always do it. Blue tent, nothing fancy, low profile. I faced the door east so the morning light would hit it. I built a small fire ring using stones already there so it wouldn't stand out. I hung my food to the east, 2 trees with good spacing, rope high enough that a bear would have to work for it. I checked the knots twice. I stamped down the grass where I walked so it wouldn't look messy. I like things neat. It helps me sleep. That night was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind where you notice every sound because there are so few of them. An owl once. Something moving in the grass far off. Heavy enough to be an animal, not close enough to worry about. I slept in short stretches. I woke before dawn because the cold crept in, then stayed awake because the valley felt too still. When the sun finally rose, it lit the meadow in bands. I made a quick breakfast, cold food, no fire. I wanted water before it got warm, so I grabbed my filter and walked toward the creek. I didn't make it far. Across the meadow, maybe 200 yards away, was another campsite. It took a moment for my brain to accept what I was seeing. Same blue tent, same shape, same dull color in the early light. A small fire ring built the same way, stones arranged in a rough oval. A bear hang to the east of it, rope angled at the same height, same spacing between the trees. It wasn't old. The grass around it was pressed down the same way mine was. The tent fabric looked clean. No dew, no sag. The place felt cold, like it hadn't been used at all. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring. I checked my own camp behind me without turning fully around, using the reflection in my pot. It was still there. Mine hadn't moved. I wasn't looking at a memory or a mistake. I didn't approach the other campsite. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I didn't try to be brave. I backed away slowly, eyes fixed on it, until the trees blocked my view. Back at my camp, I packed fast but not sloppy. Sleeping bag rolled tight. Tent poles bundled. I didn't eat. I didn't boil water. I kept checking the meadow through gaps in the trees. I expected movement. I didn't get any. I noticed things then that I hadn't before. My boot prints leading out into the meadow from earlier, crisp in the soft ground. Another set near them that matched mine too well. Same tread, same size, same slight wear on the heel. They didn't overlap. They ran parallel for a short distance and then stopped. I told myself there were explanations. Same tent model is popular. People copy setups. Someone could have been there before me and left early. Someone could have followed me in and set up as a joke or a warning or something worse. The explanations didn't help. I shouldered my pack and started out the way I came. The valley felt different once I committed to leaving. Smaller, like the space behind me was watching the space in front of me. I stayed near the creek. I didn't stop. I didn't look for shortcuts. When I crossed the open meadow again, I felt exposed, like something was timing my steps. Near the far end of the valley, where the ground starts to rise and the trees thin, I looked back once. I didn't want to, but I did. There was only one campsite, just one blue tent in the meadow, one fire ring, one bare hang to the east. It was mine. The other one was gone, not abandoned, not broken down, gone in a way that made it look like it had never been there. No pressed grass, no dark fire scar, no rope marks on the trees, nothing. I stood there longer than I should have again. I scanned the ground with my binoculars. I scanned the treeline. I saw no movement, no smoke, no birds lifting. The valley looked untouched. I turned and hiked hard until my legs burned and my pack felt heavier than it should have. I didn't stop until I hit the faint trail again. I didn't slow until I reached the truck. Days later, at home, I cleaned my gear. I shook out the tent and found pine needles that weren't from my campsite. I found a short length of blue cord in my pocket that wasn't mine. Same thickness as my bare rope. Cut clean, not frayed. I went through my photos. I had taken one picture of the valley that morning, meant to catch the light on the grass. When I zoomed in, I could see the second campsite in the distance. Clear as day. Same layout. Same color. Proof that it hadn't been a trick of the light or a tired mind. I reported it to the ranger station weeks later. Not as a complaint, just as information. They listened. They took notes. They didn't follow up. I haven't gone back to that valley. I still camp. I still backpack. I still go alone. But I don't set up the same way anymore. I don't use that tent. I don't leave my site neat enough to copy. Somewhere in that valley, someone watched me build a camp. Someone took their time matching it piece by piece. Someone waited until I turned my back and then removed every sign they had been there, clean enough to leave nothing behind. And the worst part is knowing they let me leave. I went camping alone because I needed space from people, not because I wanted danger. It was late September, shoulder season, when most families were gone and the weather could still turn without warning. I drove into a national forest in Montana that I had visited once years before. No permit was required for dispersed camping. No check-in station. Just a long gravel road, numbered spurs, and signs warning about bears and sudden storms. I chose a site far from the main road. I followed a narrow spur until it ended in a wide clearing near a bend in a river. The place looked unused. No fire scars, no trash, just flattened grass where elk might bed down and a few old logs pushed aside by snowmelt. Trees ringed the clearing on three sides. The river ran slow and brown on the fourth. I liked that nothing felt staged. I parked, shut the engine off, and sat there for a moment. When the sound died, the quiet felt heavy. Wind in the trees, water sliding over stones. Nothing else. I set my camp methodically. Tent first, a dull green dome, staked low. sleeping pad and bag inside. I placed my pack under a tree and hung my food farther back, higher than I usually bothered with. There were fresh bear tracks along the riverbank, deep enough to still hold water. I noted them, then forced myself not to stare too long. As the light dropped, the temperature fell fast. I made a small fire, just enough to cook and warm my hands. I kept it controlled. I've always been careful about that. The smell of smoke drifted straight up. No wind. The sky turned flat and gray, then deepened to blue. I ate, cleaned up, and doused the fire until the rocks hissed. That was when I noticed something off. On the far side of the clearing, near the trees, there was a shape that hadn't been there before. At first I thought it was a stump. Then I realized it was too straight, too tall. It was a pole, a long branch stripped of bark, planted upright in the ground. At the top was a scrap of fabric tied with cord. I knew for a fact it hadn't been there when I arrived. I had walked that side of the clearing while looking for a place to hang my food. I remembered the trees, the fallen log, the patch of bare dirt. The pole stood exactly where I would have noticed it. I didn't touch it. I walked closer, slow, heart working harder than it should have. The fabric was part of a shirt, torn clean, faded blue. Not old, not rotten. The cord was paracord, black, tied neatly. There were no footprints around it that I could see, but the ground was hard-packed and dry. Tracks wouldn't show well there. Still, the placement felt deliberate, like a marker. I told myself there was a simple reason. Hunters mark areas. Someone could have been there earlier and left. Wind could have knocked it over before, and I hadn't noticed it until it stood out against the darker background. The explanations sounded thin even as I formed them. I went back to my tent and zipped it up fully. I didn't leave it open for airflow like I usually do. I lay on my back and listened. The night was active. Something moved along the river for hours. Heavy splashing, slow steps, stopping and starting. An animal, I told myself. Probably a moose or bear. I stayed still and let it pass. Later, closer to midnight, I heard footsteps on dry ground. Not near the river, near the clearing. Measured steps. Not circling, crossing. They stopped, then resumed, then stopped again. Each pause felt intentional, like someone checking their position. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't shine my light. I kept my breathing shallow and counted the seconds between sounds. The steps moved toward the trees, then faded. I didn't sleep after that. I watched the inside of the tent brighten slowly as morning came. When it was light enough to see clearly, I got dressed and stepped out. The pole was gone. The ground where it had stood looked untouched. No hole, no disturbed soil, no snapped roots. It was as if it had never been there. My camp, however, had changed. My pack was no longer under the tree. It sat 3 feet closer to my tent, turned so the pockets faced outward. The zipper I always keep tucked was pulled halfway down. Nothing was missing. Nothing new had been added. Just moved. I packed immediately, not rushed, but focused. I didn't want to leave anything behind that would force me to come back for it. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't boil water. I broke down the tent, folded it tight, and strapped everything down. Before leaving, I walked the edge of the clearing one last time. Near the river, I found footprints that weren't there the night before. Boot prints, adult size, deep heel marks. They stopped short of my tent, then turned away. They didn't lead to a vehicle. They led into the trees, away from the road. I loaded the car and started driving back the way I came. After a few miles, I checked the mirror. Dust hung in the air behind me, thick enough to show movement. For a second, I thought I saw a figure step out from the trees near the clearing, watching the road. Then the dust settled and there was nothing. At home, unpacking days later, I found something in my tent bag, a strip of faded blue fabric, the same color as the one that had been tied to the pole. It was knotted at one end with black cord. I know it wasn't mine. I know it hadn't been there before. I threw it away. I washed everything twice. I didn't report it because I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a story. I still camp, but only in places with people nearby. I choose sites that are already marked, already used, already noisy. I don't camp where nothing feels claimed, because someone out there took the time to mark a place, enter my camp while I lay awake inside it, touch my gear without taking anything, and leave without a trace. And they wanted me to know they could.